Hey everyone, it's Lisa from the blog farmhouseonboone.com, and today I'm standing here in our Victorian farmhouse kitchen that is finally complete. We renovated this thing in 4 parts. We did the eat-in kitchen dining room, then we did this main kitchen area, which is what most of my videos and thought process centered around, and then we did the office and then the pantry. And I took you along on every part of it starting 2 years ago this summer. That's the first video in my Victorian farmhouse kitchen renovation playlist. Sorry, I just ran back from the barn, so I'm like completely out of breath. Back in that video, I was pregnant with Daniel, so that's how long this all took. And just last week, we completed the pantry, or a few weeks ago now. I revealed it here just a couple weeks ago. And so I thought it'd be really fun to wrap up this playlist with a kitchen renovation Q&A. I put out a question box over on Instagram. I got tons of questions. So I thought I would throw this in that Victorian farmhouse kitchen renovation playlist just to wrap it all up. Later though, I actually got a message from somebody saying, I really wish that I could see it all in a tour because I did it all in individual parts, but I never did a whole tour. So I put that on my video list. I'm gonna get the kitchen really clean, probably bake some bread, add some flowers, and do all 4 parts at one time. So that will actually probably be the last video in the kitchen renovation playlist, at least for the foreseeable future. But I already had this one on my schedule. So we're gonna do the Q&A first, and then I probably will wrap it up with that. So let's dive into the questions. All right, so first thing is I got a lot of questions about our vintage range, whether it's actually vintage, how efficient it is compared to modern gas stoves, where I got it, about large pans in the oven. So tons of questions all about the stove. Did it come with the house? And then also lots of questions about the range hood or lack thereof. So let's dive into a few questions about our vintage range. So this, from the person who we got it from, is a 1949 caloric range. I found it on Facebook Marketplace for, I believe, $250. This was probably about 2 years now. I also had some questions about restoring it, also about how we regulate the temperature, since I do light it with a match. Some of you wondered if I even can regulate it. So this, and I could be wrong about this, but nobody's corrected me yet. I'm sure you guys will. If this is something I'm wrong about, I'm sure someone will correct me about it, but I don't think that the technology for gas ranges has really come that far. It's a really simple concept. So the burners on top are adjustable by the knobs. The fire either is really small or it gets bigger. It works the same whenever I go to my mom's house and I cook on her stove, and hers is a brand new gas range and oven. It works the exact same. I really don't think that the vintage in this case actually affects the functionality. There are a few things though. One thing that has changed since my mom got her stove and I got mine is that it does not have the igniter. So the top of my stove year round is always warm. It's always hot. It's a great place to put rising bread all year round. I actually really love it for my ferments. But the reason for that is there are standing pilot lights. So a small amount of gas just keeps little pilot lights lit so that whenever I flip the knobs to turn my burners on, they ignite and it lights without a match, without a lighter. Now the oven part, there is no standing pilot light, there is no igniter. So the way to get it lit is just to turn the gas on slightly, add a match or a lighter, and then it ignites. Now the thing about that is it does have a thermostat. So even though I light it with the match or lighter, my favorite way actually has become a lighter. It regulates temperature just like a modern oven. That was the one thing that was super messed up on this, and our stove guy fixed it. He also fixed some parts where things were peeling. He repaired this knob here. He added like a little bit of glue and painted it because it was chipped off. Little things like that, but the biggest thing he did was he replaced the thermostat. And that was something that I had to find online at vintage stove parts, but he told me that that's the only thing that really goes bad with these and that it should be good to go for pretty much forever. So in every way, it actually functions completely like a modern oven and stove. Now there is one drawback to these vintage ranges. When I first bought it, I thought that both doors were ovens. Actually, the left door is storage. So that's where I keep 9x13 pans and baking dishes. And then on the right is actually the only part that is an oven. And for the most part, it works out just fine. I can fit 4 9x13s turned sideways. I can fit 2 large cast iron skillets. I can only fit 1 Dutch oven. So if I'm making bread, I can only make 1 loaf at a time. So that is definitely a drawback and possibly something to consider if you're thinking about this. Other than that, I don't really have any regrets with it. It works perfectly for our family. The reason that I went this route is I wanted something that looked vintage and unique, and the only other option was spending something that's vintage inspired for about 10 grand. And this one cost about $1,000 total once we had it restored and paid for it. Now, we are super lucky in that we have a local guy who is enthusiastic about vintage appliances. He restores refrigerators, ovens. He knows everything. He's been doing it forever. My friend Sarah Jo actually lives 4 hours away, and she drove all the way here to use my stove guy. So whether or not it's possible for you to find someone who can fix them up, I really don't know. For us, that made this just a slam dunk, no-brainer. He even got the little light that's on the back working and the outlet, so it's just fun and I really love it. Now, another question I got a lot was the stove next to the wall and if that's constricting. Honestly, I got that question a lot and I've never thought about it until I got that question. I don't know what it is, but I actually have never noticed that being a problem. Maybe when I'm standing at the burner closest to the wall, I can fully move my arm, and so it's never been something that I've really considered. Now, I also got a lot of questions about the layout of this kitchen because it is not the usual layout. I have the fridge tucked away over there, then the sink, then the oven, all in one line. And typically these 3 things are in a triangle in a standard kitchen. But in this case, there was no other option. We thought it through. And unless you want to take the historic windows and raise the height, there is no way to bring anything around. All right, I switched locations because we are having work done today on our bathroom, which I'm really excited about, but it's loud. This was on the plan for the day, so I'm still gonna try to get it done. So as far as the layout, I enlisted the help of my friend Paige from Farmhouse Vernacular to help me figure out if there was any other way, because every way I scratched my head, there was no other way to wrap the kitchen around without seriously altering the house. So we would have either had to get rid of the French doors that lead into the mudroom, which are really pretty, or raise the windows, which would have changed the whole front appearance of our house. And we both agreed there just wasn't. So although the layout isn't how it's typically done, I don't actually dislike it at all. I find that it functions really well. I'm sure that there are better layouts if you are thinking about a kitchen whenever you are building a house. But of course, we were putting a kitchen into a house that was built 160 years ago. So it's just working with what we had without severely altering anything, removing walls, moving windows. That isn't something that we really wanted to do. The biggest challenge that we had with the kitchen previously was counter space. So we were able to remedy that with the little space that we did have between where the cabinets are and the eat-in kitchen office portion of the kitchen starts by adding a large work table. So that's the only way we could really gain any counter space because of the way the layout is all along one wall, and it really functioned well for that. And I love how much more space it provides. So lots of questions about the open shelving and the vent hood. Our open shelving turned out to be more of a display place. Most of the dishes up there I don't use all that regularly. I kind of plan to, but the ones on the second shelf are just display, and I actually just recently got them all down and cleaned them up and cleaned up the shelves, but it was the first time I did that. So if they are grimy, and they were super grimy, I can't really see it. And so for me, that's about a twice a year job of cleaning them up. I don't go around and constantly wipe them. You can't see it because whatever grime there is on top and behind, and so I really don't see it. It doesn't really bother me. The ones on the bottom, I use the spice basket a lot. I use the teacups and the bowls, so they get washed anyway. And as far as organizing them, I only have that one little shelf, so it's just something that I swap out for Christmas time and seasons. It's a fun little place to decorate, but I don't really have a ton of open shelving. I just have those 3 little shelves. I found the piece at an antique shop for, I believe, 20 bucks, painted it, it fit perfectly over the stove. Most of our dishes are stored in the hutch that is between the stove and the dining table, and it fits in the bottom part all of my pots and lids, and then in the top part, plates, bowls. So that hutch probably provides the storage of at least 2, maybe 3 cabinets. So I really encourage you to, if you're thinking about doing a kitchen renovation, I love the freestanding look of adding a hutch instead of just all cabinets, floor to ceiling built in. Think about where you can add in pieces like that that don't really look like cabinets to people. So I get that a lot. Like, how do you store anything with those few cabinets? And really, I have this other massive cabinet that I have plenty of space to store things in, but it just doesn't have a cabinet look to it. Now, I wish in some ways we could have even done more freestanding things, but with the layout, I really couldn't figure out exactly where we would put those pieces. So I am happy with how it is. I haven't thought of any different way to do it, but I do encourage you to, if you have a wall like that, to, instead of putting cabinets in that area, maybe find a vintage or antique hutch. As far as the hood range, there are times when it's a problem. Certain things, I put off the smoke detector. If I'm frying potatoes in the cast iron skillet or making bacon, those kind of things, it can be an issue. We do have a window right next to the stove, so if I'm doing something particularly like frying something, we put a box fan there in the window and it kind of blows it out. It's a problem infrequently enough for me to deal with the aesthetic of not having the range hood. So that's just my personal preference. I would rather have to deal with cleaning the shelves every once in a while than having to always look at the range hood, especially in the location where my stove is. So it just would look really awkward, I think, to have a range hood there. But I actually don't think about this much, or I don't even know if I would remember to turn it on if we had it. I've never actually had a range hood, so I've always had to deal with not having one. And so I'm just used to it. So maybe it would be super convenient to have a range hood, and I don't know what I'm missing. Now, another thing I will say is, for about 6 months maybe, we had a garbage disposal in the sink that was here from the previous owners. And I have to say, those things are nice. Those are really nice. We do give any food scraps to our animals, to the chickens, but it was pretty nice. We didn't have to scrape the plate. So there's something too that we don't have that you can totally get by without. You just scrape the plates before you do the dishes. But it's another one of those things that it was pretty convenient while we had it. I did get a ton of questions about the island work table, where we bought it, if we had it built. So I actually purchased the legs online, and then the contractor that helped us with the cabinets, he built the rest of the table, and then we had the countertops installed from Lowe's. So we went with the exact same quartz countertops that we did for the rest of the counters onto there. So it was kind of a 3-step process of gathering, building, and then adding the countertops. It is custom to this kitchen. Looking back, it's slightly too large, but it's not something that's a complete deal breaker. I would probably make it a little bit less long and a little bit less deep going back, but it still does function just fine, and we won't be changing it because that would just be too much work. I also did get several questions about why we don't have bar stools at the island and where people sit when they gather in our kitchen. We do have the eat-in kitchen area, so that's where people will gather together. And then we don't have bar stools currently. Now, the reason is that we wouldn't be able to sit bar stools up to it that have like high backs, only something that would slide underneath, simply because there is not enough walking space to accommodate that many chairs. But eventually I probably will get some bar stools that can slide underneath and then be pulled out at mealtime for whenever our kids get a little bit older, because we won't all fit around that little table. Now we do also have a formal dining room, but it is so far away from the kitchen, I can't really see using it. So we still haven't decided what we're gonna do with that space. Part of me wants to make it a living room and then make the living room a master bedroom, because this house only has so many bedrooms, and as our kids get older, we might want more, so we'll see. But for now, I'm pretty much planning that we'll always be eating right in the kitchen, and some bar stools might really help, especially if they can be tucked under the island. Again, do you regret having the oven in the corner? I truly don't find it restrictive, and then also, I like that the knives are close by and the cutting boards, and I like that I could have my shelf above it, and there truly just was no other place to put it. So with the sink being centered on the large window, which was really important to me, that left one corner for the refrigerator and one corner for the stove in order to maximize what little bit of counter space we had. I would say the most common question, probably about every other question in this Q&A, is what is one thing you could do differently now that you've lived in it? Anything you do differently? What do you regret? I actually shared a whole video on kitchen regrets, so I will leave it down in the description box if you want to check that out fully. I will briefly mention the few. One is the size of the work table. The longer I live with it, the more I wish it was just a little bit smaller, but it's not a complete regret. It still works perfectly for our space. I love that it's open so that it's not this big bulky thing that blocks the sight lines. It still feels very much like a table because the area is small and we needed the counter space. So it was the most effective way to do it without being too bulky. The other, in this one, we will eventually change. We haven't gotten to it yet, but it is on the to-do list, is the window being so large. Not the size of the opening, but I wish now that instead of having the large window in between and the two smaller windows, I would have 3 equal windows with wood beams, or however you would say it, framing in between, so that it doesn't look like a vast open space that a window was put in. Instead, it's like 3 cozy little windows. I think it would just look more appropriate for our farmhouse style, as opposed to this one large modern window. That was just one of those things that you don't think about. There are so many details when you're renovating a kitchen that you don't really think about, and after it's in, I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. But I hadn't even thought about that being a thing. So that's something that can actually be fairly easily changed without costing a ton of money, because the window we got is actually 3 windows clipped into one. So I'm pretty sure we can use the 2 outer windows and just buy 1 more that size. So that's the plan. When we'll get to it is, who knows. I can't think of anything else I regret, but I might have shared more in that video. I know I was trying to drum up some things, and it was probably sort of a boring video because I actually do love a lot about our kitchen renovation, and maybe there'll be things over the years that I'll find that I regret, but I find that it does function really well, especially for the space that we had to work with. There just are only so many options, and I think we made it so much more functional and appropriate for the house. A few questions about how we considered resale value when we renovated this kitchen. I'm just gonna keep talking right through the construction noises. I'm super sorry. I'll get closer so you can hear me better. And do we consider this our forever home? So we did consider it to an extent. Now, if I was thinking about this house, the flip house, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. I would have probably not done a vintage stove. I would have probably not done a vintage sink. I just would have made it look cute, maybe like modern farmhouse for the average buyer to enjoy. But 1, we do plan to be here a while, and 2, my business is so heavily dependent on the kitchen. I spend most of my videos cooking in the kitchen, giving you meal inspiration, taking photography of food for my blog. And so I didn't consider resale value as much as maybe a lot of people would who don't rely on their kitchen to make an income. I knew that I really wanted it to have a ton of farmhouse charm, not so much like a studio kitchen, but a lot of times kitchens that are on TV or something like that. All of a sudden got bright in here. Where you're demonstrating recipes on video, those elements like a vintage stove are going to be something that's going to set the space apart. So because of that, we definitely didn't think fully about resale value. Now, there are a few things that we did do for resale value. So one is I didn't want a dishwasher. I've gone into this a ton. I have nothing against dishwashers. I truly just feel like I spend more time on dishes when I have one, because we cook 3 times a day. We rinse and repeat. The same dishes just keep getting put back on the table. I'm not super thorough in how I wash because we do just use them again. And so I'm just not a dishwasher fan. I wanted the space for my grain milling, so I have my wheat and my grain mill all stored in the spot where a dishwasher would ordinarily be. However, we did run the lines to that cabinet for plumbing, and then we also made the cabinet with the same size as a dishwasher. So it would be really simple if for some reason life circumstances changed and we decided we wanted to move, we could pull out that cabinet and hook up a dishwasher easily, because I think that would be really important. I don't think that most people would buy a house without a dishwasher. So in our last house before we sold it, we added a dishwasher. And I know that that's gonna be something that buyers are going to, even though it's a simple fix, sometimes people just want move-in ready and they can't overlook that there's no dishwasher. So I thought about it there. I honestly probably didn't think about it a whole lot beyond that, mostly because we do make a living with the kitchen. So I can do a lot of things that aren't as practical in my space because of that. But at the same time, I do encourage you to not think overly about things just in terms of, is this practical? Is this what most people would want? And do what you love. Because I do love our kitchen. I love the vintage style. And I'm glad that for however long we will live here, which this could be our forever home. I just don't say forever because I feel like life circumstances can change at any time. And so you just never know. But I'm glad that I did things that most people wouldn't choose. I mean, I know most people wouldn't go get a vintage sink and a vintage oven and stove, and for me, it's the perfect choice. Also, lots of questions about the sink, where to get it. So it's also vintage. I did find it at a salvage shop near where we live. So there's a salvage shop in St. Louis called Refab. I think I paid around $200 for it. Now the key with the sinks like that is to make sure that they don't have a whole lot of chips and need resurfacing. Ours did not, and so it was a really good buy for that price because it just could be popped in. Sure, I had to go source the right faucet, and then of course it was pretty much a process to get the cabinet design all perfect with the counter that it sat on and making it lower and make everything work out around the sink. But I am really glad that we took that extra effort to have something so unique. Did you have to cook on a camp stove during the reno, and how'd you do dishes? So we actually kept the oven and stove that we had before all until it was time to put in the cabinets where it was. So for a really long time, and you probably saw this in any videos during that time, we had our old stove just plugged in, just kind of sitting there. And then we were working around it with demo and starting to add in components of the new kitchen. But until we absolutely ran out of space, we just left that thing plugged in and used it. It was, I don't remember very well, but it was a very short time that we had to deal with no oven and stove. Now, dishes on the other hand was quite the thing. The bathroom, the guest bathroom that is just outside of the kitchen, actually has a pretty deep sink, and that's where we did dishes for far too long. I want to say it was 6 months or so. It's one of those things that's all a blur now, but something happened with us thinking that we were going to be getting the cabinet in sooner and removing the old sink, and then just things not working out how we wanted them to with the way that the cabinets were made and the sink, and needing to get different faucets. And however that was, it was months between tearing out the old sink and getting in our new sink. And we got so used to it that even after our sink was finally in, we would all be bringing our dishes into the bathroom and then like, wait, we have a sink. So that was really, really annoying for sure. Again, lots of questions about the oven. If you want to find something similar, I recommend Facebook Marketplace. They're all over. Everybody's trying to get rid of them. If you can figure out how to change the thermostat, or you can find a local person to fix that for you, they really are some well-made machines that, in my opinion, do function just like modern stoves. I mean, they have the flame, they regulate the temperature. I bake all of my recipes that I test for my blog in that oven. Does it beautifully. The temperature is right once we change that out. And so they aren't some really difficult thing to cook with. They really do function like modern. And so if you can find a way to fix that, you can probably find them really cheap online. Again, we have about $1,000 in ours at this point, but if you're going for the vintage look, you're not gonna find anything like that. I've seen reproductions for extremely expensive prices, and the ones that are any cheaper just frankly don't actually look vintage at all. I get this question a lot. I think sometimes there are certain things that would drive some people nuts, and so you just can't imagine why it wouldn't drive me nuts, but then there's probably things that would drive me nuts that wouldn't drive you nuts. So I get the question a ton about the berkey. Why would you not design a place for the berkey? And it just doesn't bother me. That I never ever think about that berkey being in the wrong spot, mostly because it's by the sink, and I don't really think there'd be any other practical place for it to be because we can fill it easily. We get water all day, every day. I don't want my berkey tucked away where we couldn't get the water. The kids couldn't access it, so I'd have to be filling cups all day long. I don't have to, it's there, everybody can get to it. So I personally have never thought about that, but maybe, I don't know, I just don't even know where I'd put it. But it's not a regret for me. What was the total cost? Was it worth the cost? Ways to cut costs? Did you pay for it with cash? Did you get a construction loan? Lots of questions about that. So we did pay for it with cash. We did not borrow anything to do the kitchen. I did go in depth on breaking down every single part of the cost and the total cost on a podcast episode. Honestly, I don't even remember what I said, so I'm just gonna leave that down in the description box so you can go listen to that if you're interested in knowing the full cost. I can tell you that once it was all said and done, we spent a lot, an embarrassing amount of money on it because of just the built-in cabinetry for the office, getting help with building the cabinets for the kitchen, adding the large window. This was not my budget kitchen makeover like it was in my last house where we just painted the cabinets, added a backsplash, and redid an inexpensive island. And I also did splurge on things. Like I said, with the island, we had it built. I did the huge piece of quartz on the office. We did floor to ceiling built-in cabinetry. We did the top part sort of recessed. We did the full piece of quartz, even though they're hidden in the cabinets. I just didn't really spare much expense on it, even though it would have been a lot cheaper to not add the huge window. We just added it. Here's the thing about cost-saving tips. You can do everything so much cheaper if you're willing to spend the time. So if you, like in our last house, every single renovation we did, we really waited. We waited until we found the perfect piece. Now with this kitchen, I needed the kitchen done for my business. To me, I was wasting money if I didn't get my kitchen functioning how I needed it to for my business by not being able to produce the content I needed for my business. So for me, how much we spent might sound like a lot, but I would have lost money not doing it that way. And so actually, maybe I didn't even spend. It's really hard to actually determine what you spent when your business is so intertwined with a space like your kitchen. And so for me, I did not worry about saving money. If I needed the sink, went there, found it, got the stove, whatever it cost to fix it, we got to get this thing done. And that was how I approached this. But I've also been in seasons of life where I didn't use my home for my business. And the most important priority of doing a renovation was not spending a ton of money. And I found that you just have to get creative, spend more time, more sweat equity, more time sourcing the perfect piece. Like if you would find the perfect, for example, I'll just try to think of an example here. If in my kitchen renovation, if I found that sink, the perfect one, just the one I needed, and it was $1,000, honestly, I just would have bought it to get the kitchen done. But in my old kitchen, in my old house, I would have said, you know what, no, I will wait an additional year until I find one for $200. So it just depends on what your current priorities are and what the kitchen will mean to you to have it done, or what it would cost you to not have it done. And so that's why it's such an individual thing, and why I'm almost like thinking about how people are going to hear the cost of the renovation and think of it in the way that I would have used to think of it. Anyways, it wasn't that much money, but I know that for some it'll sound like a lot because it would have sounded like a ton to me 10 years ago. But just to give you a rough estimate, probably once we did the built-in cabinetry for the office, the built-in cabinetry for the pantry and the shelves and the kitchen and all of it, I would say between 30 and 40,000, which is a lot. I get it. And it really isn't even worth it for this house resale wise to put that much of a kitchen in. But that wasn't my goal with this house. And if you were doing a flip house, that would be dumb. You should not do that. So that's why there's so many disclaimers here, because I'm just thinking about how in our last house, we spent $5,000 and we completely revamped it, but it took us forever and I wasn't using the kitchen in a way that would have justified spending anywhere near that. So hopefully that makes sense as to why we jumped in and did this kitchen like this. Also, okay, does the cooking air harm your antiques due to steam, fats, and smells? So I don't put anything in antique-wise that's expensive in this house. All of it I buy with the intention of this can get broken, and I'm totally okay with it. So it's okay if it does. Honestly, I don't know, but I don't have any antiques that are too precious to get messed up. Is there anything you wish you would have splurged / upgraded on? Again, I kind of did this kitchen with the cost not totally being the important factor. So I don't think there was anything that I didn't want that I didn't buy, or that I wanted that I didn't buy. Now the window thing, that was just an oversight on my part. I would have done it that way if I'd thought of it. But there's nothing I would have done differently cost-wise. We are looking to renovate, but so much money, saving cost, but still getting something you love, ? Again, take your time, map it out, take years if you have to, sourcing that perfect island. So for going back to my island example, I could find at a vintage or salvage shop an island that would fit that space perfectly. I know it. I could definitely eventually come across one that would be perfect. And so if that is your situation and time isn't the issue, it's the money, do that. And make a list of all the things you need. I need a hutch that is exactly 35 inches wide for this certain area. I need an island that is 90 inches long by whatever depth. I'm just making this stuff up. And then go antique shopping, and over time it'll come together. It'll look just as beautiful as my kitchen. It'll be so much cheaper. It just will take a while. So that's always the trade-off with everything. My husband says that with anything you get ever, you can only have 2 of 3 things. So one is done well, fast, and cheap. Yes, you can only ever have 2. So pick 2. I guess in this case, I went with done well and fast. There have definitely been times in my life where I've gone with done well and cheap. So pick 2 and figure out your priorities, and you can definitely accomplish it for so much cheaper. I'm thinking about my friend, Sarah Jo from Briarton Farm. She has such a beautiful, charming kitchen, and she and her husband did it on a shoestring budget. They did everything themselves. She took forever to source the perfect everything, shelves and window. They didn't even just go buy a window. They found a window off of something and then cut the hole perfectly to fit it. Everything pieced together and beautiful, and I love it. And every part of their house, they're lovingly doing on a very small budget, yet it looks so beautiful. And her secret weapon is time. Just ask her. They have rooms in their house that they're just now starting to get into, and they'll be living in a construction zone for a while, but it'll be perfect and beautiful whenever it's done. It truly is. Okay, somebody's asking more about the pantry shelves. We had the same guy that built the cabinets. My light keeps changing, so I keep having to adjust. Build those, and I found the brackets on Lowe's.com. I will try to find the exact ones in the link and link them down in the description box. Also, if there's something you want to know the source of that I haven't mentioned on here, go into the Victorian kitchen renovation playlist and you can watch through each video, and I link things in all of it. So the sources for everything, the whole story of our kitchen is all there. Were you able to repurpose any materials or was it all new? We really weren't. I got a lot of people who were really upset about the cabinets, and I did give them to my sister, even though she ended up not going with the house. So they're just still sitting in the barn at my parents' place. And they're nice cabinets. They just did not work for this space. I would have loved to utilize them on the bottom here, and it just, the dimensions, it just didn't work out. And so we did not. Mostly everything was new. Did you know what you wanted each area to look like from the start, or was it a process? Pretty much. Now there are a lot of details that come along over while you're working on things. Like for example, somebody's working on my bathroom right now, and I thought where I wanted to put the clawfoot tub, we would just put a curtain so that way the door wouldn't open where the clawfoot was. And then he suggested framing it up and just making a door that would open above the clawfoot. Smart. I hadn't thought of that. And so that is what we're going to do. Those kind of things do come up along the way. But for the most part, I knew how I wanted this all to look. Okay, also 2 questions about the cabinetry, using it as a desk because of the doors in the leg area. So I actually opened the bottom cabinet doors and put my feet inside. So that is where you actually can sit up to it like a desk. And then whenever you're all done with the work, I put the chair back over to the kitchen table, close the cabinets, and it just looks like cabinetry again. So when I'm working, they are open. Were there specific elements you started with and planned around, i.e. the stove or sink, etc.? So yes, I found the stove and sink beforehand. That way we could fit things around it, and we had to. So in order to make that stove work, we needed a non-standard size of cabinet next to it. In order to make that sink work, we needed the shorter cabinet. So I totally would recommend doing that. Those certain items that you have to have will require you to build around them a bit. So if you are wanting something vintage and antique, to source that first. Okay, do you regret the sink or in the oven? Do they have problems or break down? Honestly, I think the older things are so heavy, like carrying in that stove and that sink, they are, I don't even know, probably double or triple the weight of the modern stuff. So I expect all of this to last even longer than if I had bought something brand new. Of course, it took a few modifications, like the new temperature regulator thing. So no, they don't break down. My stove guy told me that this vintage one will never ever break down, so it's good to know. How do you keep it so clean with so many kids? I don't. I mean, it's, you know, it's like a regular kitchen where it's dirty most of the time. Was it hard to have your kitchen under construction? For how long? Interestingly, I'm here talking about this like a year after the bulk of the hard stuff has been done. And so I will say, oh, I'm sure it was fine. It was fine. No, it was horrible. I just don't even remember anymore what it was like going through it. And there were so many things that we thought would be really fast. Like, okay, we got this, we got the cabinet maker, we got the sink. And then things would come up where some measurement was wrong. There was a miscommunication in how we wanted it done. And then it took even longer what we thought would be fast and easy. So overall, I feel like 2 years of having this completely just kitchen we walked into with, you know, no office, no eat-in dining, no pantry, well, pantry, but not how it looks, no cabinets in the pantry, none of it. 2 years start to finish, all done. It's really not bad. At the time, it felt like a long time, but looking back now, I'm like, wait, that was only 2 years ago? I can't believe we got that all done in 2 years. So really, honestly, it felt bad at the time, but I'm glad it's all done. Does the island move around? Technically it could. It's not anchored to the ground or anything, but it's extremely heavy with the quartz on top. So it doesn't. We don't move it. What paint color did you use in the pantry? I talked all about everything in the pantry video, but it was Benjamin Moore Carolina Gull. The countertops are a Quartz that I got at Lowe's. I talked about them in the renovation reveal. Again, it's in the playlist. I talked about the exact ones. If you're interested in getting the same color, we really wanted something that looked like marble, but that didn't have the maintenance of marble, even though I've heard from some people it's really not that bad at all. But we just did, we went with the Quartz, and it has some of the veining that makes it look like marble. How do you find the right contractor? That's tricky, especially now. We're finding it so hard to even find anybody to work on anything. Everybody tells us they're out till like next summer. I don't know. Ask around, look at the work that they've done, communicate a ton. I find that a lot of contractors, they get some ideas in their head. So you tell them what you want and then they think, you know, I think this would be better. And I think that's probably what she'll want. And then they do it and then you're like, you know. So communicating exactly. Like if you show them a picture and there's little exposed hinges on the doors, you need to actually say, I want those exposed hinges on the doors, because those are the little details that you think are important, but they might not necessarily notice. They just see the cabinets. Oh man, we had so many. It's funny because when you look at something when it's all done, you think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But there's so many little details that go into it. And there were definitely times where I thought one thing, he thought another thing. And then when I saw it, I realized, oh, there was a miscommunication there. And so communicating is really important. Your expectations from the beginning, don't leave anything to, oh, they'll understand. No, every little thing. Because I find that even if somebody doesn't have the same style as you, if they can, you know, they have the carpentry skills, you can make your vision come to life as long as you monitor the process and you really communicate what you want. How much can you expect cost-wise for a renovation this large? Again, it totally depends on how much time you want this all to take. I think things are different now than they even were after COVID. I think that, I don't really know. Like I know lumber's more expensive, but I don't know what it is with the shortage of finding people to work on things, but there for sure is. I've heard it all over the place. So it's not just where I live. You're probably having a hard time finding people to work on things, do certain things. I don't know why they're so booked out, but they are, which means that the prices are also more expensive. It depends on where you live. So I've had some people, after I shared my podcast with the whole cost breakdown on everything we spent, say, oh, that's not expensive. Where we live, that would cost this. And so I don't know. Here in Missouri, I felt like we just flat did it. I mean, we did the huge kitchen renovation, whereas in some locations, things are just even more expensive and I don't even know what they'd be now. So it really depends, but you can know beforehand what it's gonna cost you if you're super organized, you have it all budgeted out, everything mapped out. There will be things that'll come up, but even though this is a renovation, I'm gonna recommend my friend Dave Ramsey again. I always recommend Dave Ramsey because he talks about budgeting to build a house, and he really is huge on not leaving anything open-ended, knowing exactly the timeline and the cost with building. And I think the same things would apply with renovating. We were not super diligent on that. And so we had things come up that I was like I didn't even know from the beginning how much it would cost. And that's not smart really financially to not know that, but you can map it out. Your sink, what is it called? I believe I searched high back, apron front, antique sink. And that's what I found. As far as searching for the vintage range, I just searched vintage range, or antique gas range. You could search antique gas range. I will say that my friend Paige from Farmhouse Vernacular, she wanted electric because she doesn't like fire in her house. And she actually just replaced it for a gas one because she said that on the older models, the electric settings are very restrictive. So there was, now you might have to go over to her page and learn more about this, but from my understanding, there was a low, medium, and high, and you could never adjust it in between. And there were times when you want medium low and medium high. And with the gas, it's perfectly easy. You just adjust the flame. You can get it really big, really small. All the flexibility is there. That's how it functions like a modern stove. So if you're not averse, or if you're okay with having the gas, I would recommend that if you're gonna go for a vintage range. They work so great. Now, we did actually have to have the gas line plumbed in because we had electric here before. I was committed to wanting a gas stove this time. Always had electric up until this point. Always wanted gas for the flexibility. I feel like it's what cooks love, is a gas range. And so I wanted that. And so I made sure to search for only ones that were gas. All right, I'm gonna take one more. I know this video is extremely long, but you can put headphones in and listen to this like a podcast. Okay, paint colors, and would you consider painting the computer cabinetry? So I actually really wanted the computer cabinetry to be wood. I wanted it to feel built in and original and grand, and I felt that only wood would do that. Now, if I were to, instead of doing the built-in cabinetry, this is another thing that I would do if budget was more of a concern, I would have found maybe like a huge antique hutch or something that didn't fill the whole space, but still served the purpose of housing all of my business type of things and my camera gear. In that case, I might have painted it. But since this is floor to ceiling, it's large and you get the view of the cabinetry from a lot of different areas. So when you're sitting in the living room, you get the view of it. When you're at the stove, you get the view of it. And I felt that if it was painted, it just wouldn't have that same vibe. Now, I maybe one day will change my mind. That's how I feel about it now. And so I really wanted the stain to be rich and deep and dark. And so that is why I definitely wouldn't paint it. Now, I would someday possibly consider doing either a color on the walls or a color on the white cabinetry at the front. And I've played around with that idea and it might happen. Right now I'm loving the white, but at some point I think it'd be fun to paint the beadboard something. Right now it is all the Benjamin Moore white dove, but I might eventually, I don't know. I'd have to get a vision for exactly how I'd want it to be, but that's the thing about paint, it's just not a big deal. You can always paint it back, and so I might get a wild hair and do it one of these days. It's just right now there's so many other projects that are pressing that I would never do it right now just for fun, but at some point I might do it just for fun, so we'll see. All right, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, if you are thinking about doing a kitchen renovation and you want to go through our whole process, check out my Victorian farmhouse kitchen renovation playlist. You can watch us from the very beginning where we are demoing the cabinets. I'm pregnant with Daniel. We're taking down the cabinets. We're trying to figure the whole thing out. I'm probably super overwhelmed and now it's done. And in those videos, as I take you through the whole process, I'm sharing things along the way. So there's probably a lot of things I'm honestly forgetting about now, and hindsight is making it look a little bit different. So you can go through that process. I will leave a link to that in the description box below. Also, check out my podcast episode where I break down the cost. Now, up until that point, we had everything done except the pantry. So that cost wasn't on there, but that wasn't super expensive. But you can get the full scoop if you are thinking about doing something and hiring someone and not doing the work yourself, and you're just wondering, how much will this cost if I want to embark on it in that particular way? That will be down in the description box below also. All right, well, thank you so much for watching this video. If you are brand new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. I make 2 new videos every week on food from scratch, natural living, and a handmade home. Thank you so much for stopping by the farmhouse.